Gradients in Illustrator are a way of applying a transition between two or more colors to an object. In Illustrator CS6, you can now easily create a gradient and apply it not only to the fill of an object, but also to the stroke of an object as well. Let's take a look at how to create and apply gradients in Illustrator CS6. Now I'm beginning this video with the gradients.ai file already open on my computer. And in order to work with gradients, I need to have my gradients panel available. And to make my life a little bit easier, I'm actually going to detach this panel from the panel dock. And this is going to allow me to also open my swatches panel. I'm just going to reposition these a little bit so that I can see both of these panels at the same time. And this is going to be a lot easier than trying to navigate between these docked panels when I'm creating my gradients. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a gradient to these clouds up here at the top of my screen. So I'm going to start by zooming in on this cloud using the Command spacebar or Control spacebar on Windows to zoom in on this cloud. Now the first thing I want to do is click on the cloud to make it active. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply a very basic gradient to this object. So down here in my gradients panel, you'll see that we have a type drop-down menu. And there's only two choices. There's linear, which runs from left to right or top to bottom or essentially in a straight line. And then we also have radial, which will create a gradient from the inside to the outside. For this example, I'm going to use a linear gradient. And by default, it's going to apply a very basic black to white gradient, which is fine to start, but we're going to customize this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the white stop selected. You can see here that the gradient is composed of two color stops. We have a white color stop and a black color stop. Every gradient needs at least two color stops. However, you can add more than that if you wish. So the white color stop I'm going to leave as is, but I'm going to add a new color stop to replace the black one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to my swatches panel and I'm going to click on this light blue color and I'm going to drag it down on top of the black color stop. And when I let go, you'll notice that it replaces that black color and is now applying that gradient to my object. Now, I'm probably going to be reusing this gradient later on. So in order to reuse it easily, I am going to click on this gradient indicator here and I'm going to drag it up here and drop it in my swatches panel. Now that gradient is a swatch that can be reused over and over again. Now the other thing we can do is with this cloud active, I actually want the gradient to be going in a different direction. So in the angle drop down, you can choose from a number of different preset angles. So I'm going to go ahead and choose 90, and that's going to have the gradient go from the bottom at white to blue at the top. And that's exactly what I want. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my hand tool to move over to the other cloud. Because what I'd like to do is select that cloud, and now that I have a gradient swatch selected, I can just click on that swatch to make it active. Come down here to the angle in the gradient panel, change angle to 90, and now my cloud looks exactly as I wish. Now I'm going to click off of that to deselect it. I'll press Command 0 on Mac or Control 0 on Windows. And now I want to apply some gradients to this ground or the foreground here. So I'm going to click on one of these circles to make them active. And we're going to do the same thing we did before with this circle selected or the ellipse selected. So I'm going to come up here to the type drop-down menu and I'm going to choose linear. And that's going to apply once again the default black to white gradient. Now I really don't want black to white. This time I want a transition between two green colors. So why don't we start right away by coming up here to our swatches panel. I'm going to drag this dark green down and replace the black swatch. Then I'm going to grab a lighter green and I'm going to drag that and replace the white color swatch. So now you can see we have a gradient going from a dark green to a light green. Now another way we can change the angle of an applied gradient is over here using my gradient tool. So if I click on the gradient tool, you'll notice that my gradient annotator now appears. And this is quite powerful because you can move this and change it in different ways. So first and foremost, you can click on your color stop to change the transition between the two colors. And you'll notice when I do that, it's really changing this information at the same time, which is very, very powerful. I'm going to move this back to where it was. You can also change the transition point between the two colors to make it a little heavier on one color than it is on the other. And then what you can also do is if you position your cursor off to the right here, I can click and drag to rotate this as well. So you can change this any way you wish. I'm just going to switch this so that the angle is changing a little bit. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that I can see this entire annotator. I'm going to click on this endpoint and just drag it in because I don't need it to be so long. And I'll just continue rotating this to get it the way that I want. You can also just click and drag anywhere to reestablish the starting and ending point of this gradient. So I'm just going to drag straight up and down, and that'll apply my gradient, but actually I want it to be reversed. So let's drag from the bottom up, and now we can see it goes from a dark green to a light green. I like that color, so I'm going to click on the gradient indicator. I'm going to drag it and drop it into my swatches panel so I can reuse it. Then using my selection tool, I'm going to select these foreground circles, and I'm going to go ahead and apply the same color swatch to them as well. But what I will need to do is I will need to click on this ellipse, grab my gradient tool, and I'll just click and drag from the bottom up to reestablish the gradient direction on these circles. To click on this one and then click and drag. That looks pretty good. So we'll click off of that to deactivate them. Now one last thing I want to show you that's new inside of CS6 is the ability to apply gradients to the stroke of an object. And that's something we've never been able to do before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to my selection tool and I'm going to click on one of these curved shapes that I have on this tree. And I'm going to make sure that I have the stroke active instead of the fill this time. Once again, I'm going to grab the radial gradient, and then we can experiment here. I'm going to open my swatches panel, and I think what I'll do is I'll grab maybe a lighter green, and then maybe a slightly darker green, and put that on the other side. And we can see now this is a radial gradient that's being applied to this shape. If I click off of it, you get a better idea of what this looks like. This is really powerful. In previous versions of Illustrator, we were unable to apply a gradient to the stroke of an object easily. Now we can do this very easily. So I'm going to add this to my swatches panel. Let's go ahead and select. I'm just going to shift click on all of these shapes. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply that radial gradient to all of them at the same time. When I click off of them, we can see now that that gradient is applied to every single one of them in the same fashion. I'm just going to press Command 0 on Mac or Control 0 on Windows. And now you can see that creating and applying gradients to your artwork is a very powerful feature. Once you know how to use and control them, the possibilities are virtually endless.